Do you know why you want to be a journalist? Have you even thought about it? Maybe you wanted to do this your whole life. Maybe you took a class and fell in love with it. Maybe you still aren't sure. I thought I knew what mine was, but really just started to realize it about a year ago. So let's listen to some of our colleagues and what they had to say.
Sergeant Klein tells me they do know some of the circumstances. It's a quick arrest for Omaha police. North High School senior Tyrus Harris. Now, experts say this variant does not seem to be any more deadly.
When I was young, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my grandparents watched the 5 o'clock news every single night in D.C.
Good evening. Imagine checking into the hospital.
It was required viewing in D.C. I looked at the anchors in D.C. like they were so fabulous, so poised, so smart, so commanding. And in Washington, D.C., with such a large Black population, that meant there were a lot of Black anchors. And I thought they were absolutely fabulous. And I said, that's something I want to do one day. I'll tell you the first time I realized the power of journalism, and that was when I studied abroad in East Africa, in Tanzania. And one of what their big assignment was to create a magazine for their school. And they were presenting some of the topics of their magazine to us. I don't think I gave much feedback because I was blown away by their courage and the power that they felt through telling stories. It was like a light went off, and I recognized journalism has the power to be the voice for the voiceless in a way that no other craft can. And that's why this is something that I need to do. Gives me chills because I have little Black girls who I know are looking at their screens and saying, I can be her one day, because they have an example. If you don't have an example, you can't have a vision. You can't even imagine it. And I'm so humbled by that. I have a woman who follows me on Facebook who says her granddaughter watches the news and says, oh, my best friend's on. And every day she says, my best friend's on TV. But I truly do believe in humanity and people's ability to put themselves in someone else's shoes if the story is told well. And if there is an effort on the part of the journalist to really show this person's life and where they're coming from so that someone else can understand the humanity in that individual.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Lena Tillett.
So started in college announcing high school football games, play-by-play announcing for radio. Was getting paid, a little bit of money to do that. But crossed paths with a news director in Greenville, where I was going to college in East Carolina. She gave me a job as a producer. Saw it as an opportunity to get into sports. Planned to transition into that. But the deeper I got into producing, the more I enjoyed it. Still got to do a little bit with sports here and there. High school football, East Carolina football and basketball, shot video, did things like that. But the producing side of it was better for me. I enjoyed it, excelled at it, continued to grow in that role, and got a chance to work with some really great journalists, both in Greenville and Charlotte. And it's just done really well for me, and it's turned into a great career for me.
I've been a television reporter and journalist for the past 25 years. People often ask me, how long have you been with ABC 15 News? And when I tell them 25 years, most of them go, that's a long time. Why are you still doing it? Why can't you do something else? And I tell them it's because I truly love what I do from the bottom of my heart. I wake up thinking about stories. I go to bed thinking about stories. I wake up in the middle of the night writing stories and checking on things to make sure that I'm covering the areas that I'm supposed to cover, that I'm covering them in a way that I would want a reporter to cover them if they lived in that community. So when there's a shooting overnight or when there's a shooting early in the morning, I have no problem with waking up out of my sleep to actually write the information and to get the information to our producers so that they can get it on the air and get it on the website, because it's just that important for viewers to know. 2020 has been, or 2020 for me was a hard year in terms of reporting. I lost so many people I know, especially older people who really helped me to become a better journalist, people who I depended on for information, funeral home directors and, pillars in the community. They all died from coronavirus. And it was difficult some days to even start to get to work because I would get a call that so-and-so or this person was in the hospital due to the virus. And so one day I asked my husband, I said, I don't know if I can do this anymore because it's so hurtful. And he says, well, you've got to really think on it and pray about it. And a few days later, I was working on a story. I was in a supermarket and a woman came up to me and she says, I really didn't believe in a lot of the information about COVID-19 until I saw your report and I saw how passionate you were about it. And I can tell you from that day, it really made the difference as to why I'm continuing to do this after nearly 25 years, just to be able to help people. It brings me so much joy to go out and cover a story about a community that's dealing with a bad road that's nearly impassable, or dealing with a drainage problem. Every time it rains, it floods in their community. And right after the story airs, the state or the city or the county sends a crew out to fix that problem. That means a lot, because those are people who not only thank me for doing my job in that instance, but when there's something else going on in the community, they see police, they hear sirens, they're going to continue to let me know. And that's what brings me so much joy. I do go through a lot. I tackle on some days more than I should, but I just can't help it because I really, truly want to help people. And I hope that over the years that I've made a difference in the lives of someone in what I do. And that's why I continue, and I still love being a television reporter, as they say, journalist.
So my why doesn't go back to any sort of childhood dream. This business isn't something that I always wanted to do. And I just realized my why about last year, 25 years into the business. So it started, I was sitting in church and I heard a word that triggered a memory. Of fish sticks and rice-a-roni. So this is Joe. He was a friend of mine in college, a really smart guy, fun, like most college kids, loved to drink beer. So one night he went to the Gingerbread Man. It was a dive bar in York, Pennsylvania, and his friends didn't show up. He needed to pay the bill and didn't have the money, so he went to his car, and he never came back in.
It was first called suicide, but Podlucky's family never believed that.
His wallet was on the dashboard, and there was no gun. So his parents started asking questions. They became really vocal and got the attention of the media. So here's where we realized the power of the media, right?
We have justice in society. There will never be any justice for my son's life being.
And shortly afterward, his death was ruled a homicide, and there was an arrest and a conviction.
The case was reopened, and 23-year-old Ricky Lee Lagares was charged with Podlucky's murder.
My message here is the power of the media. If we hadn't been there to tell his story, what would have happened in this case? Maybe it still would have been a suicide. His family never would have been able to rest. So I just want you to know that there is value in what we do, and to me, that's probably the thing most that is rewarding, is that we can solve cases, that we can help the police, that we can get the word out, that we provide a public service. So back to church. Sitting there, I'm thinking about my contract. It's up. I've put 25 years in the business, kind of wondering why I'm doing this. And I hear a word, murder, and it sends my brain into a rewind. and I think of Joe, and I think of the impact of the media on Joe's death. But rather than feeling sad and sorry, I have a little story to tell you too that'll kind of make you smile. So Joe invited me over for dinner one night and made me fish sticks and rice-a-roni. So when I think of my why now, it's fish sticks and rice-a-roni.
How did I get into news? Well, I wanted to be an actress growing up. I grew up in plays, I worked in theaters across Charlotte, and I just knew that I was going to be an actress one day. And it came time to go to college, and my mother said, we just can't afford for you to be a starving actress in LA. Like, who's going to pay LA rent while you're out auditioning? So pick something else. So I picked production, radio, television, and film. I thought, okay, I can find actual jobs that will pay me to work behind the scenes and to maybe produce or direct or handle the technical behind the scenes work. Let's go for that. Well, I went to Howard University and I studied radio, television, and film. And in that major, you had to take a journalism course. So I signed up for this class, and I very quickly learned that in order to pass, you have to write articles that get published, either in the local papers in Washington, D.C., or at the Hilltop, our campus paper. So I started writing papers for the Hilltop, and after my first story, I was hooked. I loved being able to stop random people to talk to them. I loved learning about something new, even though it was a subject that I wouldn't have gone out and chosen on my own. I married my love for technical behind the scenes broadcast work with journalism, and I switched my major, and the rest is history, as they say. I figured out that there were a couple of things that really made it stick for me. One, I love to talk to people. Just having the experience of getting to learn about someone and meet someone that you might never get a chance to meet was really fascinating, is really fascinating to me. And I love to learn about new subjects. I love to read. I love to just consume information, and to have a job that allows you to do that every day, it doesn't really get that much better than that for me. So I consider myself pretty fortunate to be able to do this every single day. I think community service is so important as well. I grew up a Girl Scout, and I've always thought it's important to leave a place better than you found it, and to do that in your community every day. It's an important responsibility, but it's also an honor to be able to serve our community in this way. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I get to show up, that I get to talk to people, and hopefully leave them feeling a little bit more informed, a little bit more empowered to go out and make decisions for their families and for their futures. It's a pretty cool gig.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Victoria Spechko. I am the news director at WPDE in Myrtle Beach and WTGS in Savannah, Georgia. I'm also the proud boss of Tanya Brown, who you saw in that video just there. While I'm talking, I would really encourage the students to share in the chat if you have a why that you want to share, or if you just want to write it in the chat, or if you have questions about how you get to your why. We want this to be a really open and collaborative session, so we want to hear from you. I think it's okay if you don't have a why. Kathy mentioned in her speech in the opening that she didn't have a why for a while. And I think your why changes. It changes as your job changes. I had a why as a journalist, and then when I became a manager, I had a why, which, by the way, is I consider it my job to create an environment where people can thrive. It's pretty simple, but it's pretty all-encompassing and something that I'm very passionate about. Kathy Hobbs, who you heard from in that video, is also here, and she is joined by 3 of her employees from WCIV who can also share their why and talk with you a little bit more. We've got some in front of the camera people, some behind the scenes people. So does anybody have a why they want to share with us this morning? Or Kathy, if one of your team members wants to get the conversation started.
Sure. You know, I was talking to Rachel Ellis, one of our reporters yesterday, and she said she's been with us for 2 years. She came from Elon, and she said her why has actually changed over the past 2 years. So I'm going to hand it over to Rachel to explain to you guys kind of how her why has developed from a student to an on-air personality.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, so just like Kathy said, it got me thinking during our interaction yesterday in the hallway just about what that is. And I think when I started at Elon, I loved talking to people. I think that was mentioned several times by a few reporters, just like the idea of meeting people that he wouldn't have maybe necessarily met, or talking to people on campus at Elon that maybe they had a story or they had something going on in their life that was maybe undershared or maybe underappreciated. And as journalists on campus, we had the opportunity to share these people's stories and get messages out from, issues in Greek life to issues with, maybe the local elections. So at that point, it was just really for me, just the enjoyment of talking to people and sharing their stories, which was very important and still is very important. It's why we do the job. But I think specifically over the past few years professionally, especially during COVID, we saw a lot of civil unrest over the summer. As mentioned, a lot of people have lost their lives this year. And I think our job has never been so important to be able to disseminate information that is vital, from vaccines to where people can get tested, to everything between. That's 2020. And I think now my why, from maybe just learning, learning how to talk to people and meeting new people and just kind of having that experience, it's really just going to work every day and hoping and knowing that you're making some impact, maybe big or small. Some days I think it varies. I think Maxwell's on here, and he's one half of our team. He's my photojournalist, and some days we'll go to a city council meeting that maybe there's an issue on the agenda that might not seem like the biggest deal to someone, but it's someone's whole life. And being able to share that information and to get to the root of a problem, like Kathy said, be a problem solver and hold the power, hold people accountable, is a complete privilege. And then, from over the summer, just being in the thick of all the civil unrest, we had, a Confederate statue come down in Charleston, and we were out in the field, 24 hours or so. And the emotion that you felt and the privilege to be able to share people's story and be able to know that you're making an impact and, have people maybe who aren't there see what was going on felt just so important. So in short, I think just, it's transitioned, it's molded, it's evolved. So I think it went from like me just being a chatty person and loving to talk to people and share stories to knowing that when I go to bed at night, feeling like we hopefully made a lick of a difference. So yeah, and it's changing, I'm sure it will continue to change.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, we do have a couple that have popped in the chat. Angel said her why, or his why, sorry, I'm not sure, is to share other people's stories or experiences with the public. We also have one from Jendaya who says, my why is to be a voice for the voiceless. That's something we talk about a lot in this business. So that's great. Another one just popped up, to use my platform for others. That's great. Forrest Tucker says, my why is to find people in sports who have a story that will resonate with everyone, sports fan or not. I think that's a really great why. I'm impressed that so many of you have already thought about this. I think when I got into this business, which was almost 30 years ago, nobody talked about a why. We all kind of, I think the most common thing we heard was people got into the business because they love to tell people's stories, or they were people, and they just love to talk with other people and things like that. And so it wasn't something that was really explored or talked about a lot. So it's great to hear so many of you already thinking about that. Cassia, my why is to bridge the gap between news on the Hill in Washington, D.C. and the public. Great. As we wait for some more to pop in, Kathy, do you want to have Alex maybe share his why?
Someone with a hand up, whoever that was, just jump in here.
I'm sorry, Rich?
Someone had their hand up. And
oh, okay.
Hey, that's me.
Go ahead, just go ahead.
Hey, how are you?
Thank you again, everyone, for awarding me. I'm good. How are you guys?
Congratulations.
Thank you again. Yeah, thank you. I just want to say my why is the same as Jendaya, to be a voice for the voiceless, provide a different perspective that we usually don't see on the nightly news, and just provide something different and make sure I'm being inclusive and really getting people's stories out there, because that's what's important to me, the people's stories.
Have you had an opportunity to do that? Do you have an example you could share with us?
Well, like you mentioned earlier, I have a website, online magazine, and on there I do interviews with really local artists. I really am deep in the music scene right now, but I do have a couple of interviews on there if you guys want to check it out. It's Cranium Magazine with the K, and I'm still working on that though. So
That's great. And way to get the plug in there. All right, we have another one from Paige. My why is to help create an escape for sports fans the way that sports reporters did for me when I was growing up. Paige, if you're willing to talk about that, I would love to hear an example of when you had that happen.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, I would just say, like, when I was growing up, I got into sports really because my dad was a big sports fan, but I sort of just used it as an escape, I guess. And like, I paid a lot of attention to what the sports reporters were saying and how they were reporting on sports, whether that be at smaller news stations, big news stations, or like sideline reporters, anything like that. And I just found it super interesting, and it just kept me like very engaged. So I want to do that for other people too.
Have you had the opportunity yet to do that? I know with COVID, things have been really tough for you guys.
Yeah, I haven't really done any like on air. I've mostly been doing sports writing throughout my college career, and I have a podcast, but other than that, like, so I guess more so through the podcast, but.
Oh, that's great. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paige, for sharing. We appreciate that. And I see Aliyah has her hand up. Do we have Aliyah?
Yes, my name's Aaliyah.
Aaliyah, I'm sorry. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So I just found out my wife a couple years ago. So as like a child, I actually wanted to be a doctor. That was like the whole goal until it was junior year of high school, and I took a chemistry class, and I was like, "Ooh, this is not gonna work. I'm just try something else." So I was like, "Let me just go to like my second passion, which is writing." So when I came to college, I was like, how can I combine like my love for health and like my love for writing? And so I soon found out about health policy and becoming like a health reporter. So like my why is really to just shine a light on the health of African Americans and other ethnic communities, and just really just try to spread like more awareness about like their health in the media.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. We appreciate that. I see we have another one that's popped into the chat from Hanson. It says, my why is to cover the inside of the entertainment industry and to ask questions that people wouldn't usually ask, to go beyond the surface level of reporting. Love that. Interview people that many do not know and expose them to the public and help them. I think that's fantastic. So what's really encouraging to me is to see that all of you have thought about these why, and I think, or your why. And I think when you're in the opportunity to do an interview with someone, sharing that is going to be fantastic for you, because I think it's really, really great. Oh, Jendaya has a hand up.
I would love to explain my why. So I'm a senior at Winthrop University, and I recently did a story basically on Tender Hearts making a men's shelter and men homeless shelter. And when I was driving around, I noticed that a lot of men are homeless and they needed a place to stay. So I looked up a story on CN2, which they had, where they were talking about Tender Hearts making a men's homeless shelter. And I'm with Winthrop Close Up, so I want to do a story on that. So I talked to a police officer in our area, and I also talked to a homeless person, and I talked to the president of Tender Hearts, and we basically talked about what they're doing for the men and like the program, how they're going to help them become like decrease the homelessness in the area. And so far, it's a great story. And so I'm editing.
Did you know your why before the story, or did the story help you get to your why?
So I knew my why before the story because I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and there's a lot of like crime rates, and like a lot of my friends have like Kathy said, a lot of my friends that I've known and family members have passed away due to crime or just like anything. So I always knew that I always want to be the voice for them, because they don't have a voice or a platform. And I always want to have that platform to help people know stuff that's going around in the area.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We have one from Brian. My why is to amplify voices of those in my community. I feel a great sense of purpose in sharing someone else's story and knowing that it made a difference in their life and the greater community. That is great. Thank you for that. Anyone else want to share? Kathy, this might be a good time for Alex to jump in.
I see a couple of people with their hands up too. So we'll get.
Oh, okay, I can't see those. I'm sorry.
That's okay. And I also, and I'm going to also bring in Max Harrison too, who's a photojournalist. And a lot of times when we have these workshops, we don't often hear from the people behind the scenes or behind the camera. And they are so important to what we do in our business. So I'm going to get a couple of hands, and then I'll have Max start thinking about his why, because I don't know that he knew I was going to call on it. So let's go ahead with, is it Angel? Yeah, go ahead, Angel.
Hi. So I put in the chat that my why is to kind of share the experience of others and share their stories. And for me, my thing to do as a budding journalist is to write feature stories and get the story out about other people's experiences to help other people learn about that. And I always learn something in the process. So whether it's a few years ago, I did a story for the Bay Weekly in Annapolis, Maryland, for a teacher who got this opportunity to go to Mexico to help out this volunteer organization that's on the tip of my tongue right now. And then for my student newspaper, I always spotlight my favorite gig is to spotlight students and their fun things. So that's my why. And I'm still trying to find some other whys in there too, but.
That's great. And I think something that made me think when you were talking about that is I think when you do establish what your why is, I think it's really important to use that not only to inform how you look for stories, but also to inform how you tell the story itself. So it's something to just keep in mind. Sometimes it's one of those things that we think about and we have it and we put a pin in it and it's over here. But I think you have to kind of bring that back up every time you go to tell a story. And I think it'll really change the way you approach the interview process and all of those things. So I encourage you to really keep those whys close to you when you're going through the process once you get in.
Mm-hmm. And
Thank you,
too, as you get out of school and you interview for positions, your news director may ask you your why. And I will tell you that we do hear a lot that I want to give a voice to people. So the more granular that you can get in explaining that, number one, you're going to show me that you're a better journalist just by the simple fact that you can explain a little bit more of what you're talking about. But two, if you become a better storyteller too in explaining all of that. So think about that when you say, you know, I want to amplify people's voices, or I want to give a voice to the voiceless. What exactly does that mean to you? And what does that mean to the people that you've interviewed? Because you're going to have a much better conversation with a prospective news director, and they're going to be like, wow, this person gets it, than just by giving kind of that overall generic answer. So
yeah, I agree, Kathy. And I think too, and I asked a couple of you this, if you had an experience that you could share about that. And so I think that also helps us understand as news directors, like how you work through the process. So being able to share an actual experience or a time where you were able to use that why, I think is really important too. And it kind of helps us, like she said, it gets more granular rather than just an overview. That was a really great point, Kathy.
Yeah, and I can't remember which person it was that said they had a very similar experience like I did with Joe. That also shows me that you're not afraid to approach somebody who has had something terrible happen in their life in order to tell their stories. There are a lot of people who are afraid to knock on doors or to bother people. But if you don't do that, you're never going to learn who that victim was or why they were important to us. And a really important thing for people to know, because you know, you hear about homicides and shootings and et cetera all the time, and you just think they're bad people, and they're not bad people. They're people who were in situations, sometimes accidentally, maybe sometimes not, but when you hear a shooting, you just kind of gloss over it. But when you hear about the victim and who they were, and that they had a family, or that, you know, they loved a certain kind of music, that makes me feel something about that person, and I want to know. So the more that you can draw the viewer in and care about a story because of a person, a character, a victim, whatever it is, the more you're going to just draw the viewer into your story and your newscast and make them care. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hanson.
Morning, everyone. I was going to ask a question that went along with my why that I typed in the box. How do you ensure that your information is accurate? And I know the question to go along with that is, how do you go about getting a story first? being the first to put it out there. You know, that doesn't always happen. But what are your steps toward that?
Well, I'll tackle the how do you get the story first part of it. And I think there's two different things you're talking about. There's breaking news, right, in the race to get that on first, and maybe on another hand, it's an exclusive or a story that nobody else has. So with breaking news, you know, obviously it's having great context in the community and all of those things. We talk a lot about being first, being right is more important. So sometimes you have to hold back when you know something is happening until you have enough or the right information to be able to put that out. Most news directors would tell you they'd rather be right than be first. So, so that's an important part of it. I think when you talk about the exclusives or having stories that no one else has, in my opinion, the way to get there is having great contacts in the community. And that does take a little bit of time. So when you get into a market, you have to start to build that trust, not just with public information officers, because they will tell everybody the exact same thing at the exact same time most of the time. But you want those other people, like you want a firefighter who's on the ground. I have a firefighter with one of our agencies here who will send me pictures, who will give me information. Nobody knows he's my contact. And that's a relationship that I've built up with him over 25 years. So you really want to start building contacts in the community and then earning trust with people about the fact that you're not going to out them, that you're going to, you know, keep that trust with that in that relationship. And a lot of times they'll tell you things that don't necessarily lead to a story in that moment, but maybe it leads to something that you can investigate or look into. So I think that's important. And I think it's also going and checking in with people. You know, nobody likes when you only call them when you need something. So it's important to check in with those folks. Tanya Brown, who you saw in the video, who shared her why, who's been a reporter for me for 25 years in July, can tell you the names of the wives of the fire chiefs. She knows how many kids they have. She knows where their kids go to school. And if Clemson wins, she'll call the chief and say, hey, was your kid at the game last night? She doesn't just call when she needs something from him. So I think that's a really, really important lesson. And she gets stories nobody else gets because they will call her first. So granted, that has taken time to build that up. But you got to start on day one to do that. And that's what's going to really set you apart from not only your coworkers, but from anyone else in that market. So I think that's really important. Did that answer your question, Hanson?
Yes, ma'am, it did. Thank you.
Can I jump in for a second, Victoria?
Absolutely.
Hey, Kevin Daniels, I'm news director at Fox 8 WGHP in Greensboro, North Carolina. So again, Hanson, to sort of build on what Victoria was saying, is there's a couple of things that, you know, we talk to our reporters about too, and I talk to students about, is make sure that you make 2 phone calls and talk to people you've never talked to before each day. And it's just, it could be from anybody in the community, just to make a contact. And then the other thing is make sure you say thank you to at least 2 people every single day. So that could be a text message, it could be a phone call, clip the story that you just did and send it and say, thanks, you know, it came out great, we really appreciate it, you know, and then like Victoria said, check in, you know, every now and then with that person, and that person becomes a contact. And that's not the PIO that's in the story. That's the person that lives in the neighborhood where the shooting happened or where the garbage isn't being picked up. Because guess what? That person's going to know what's going on a day-to-day basis. So I think you have to take, you know, these building blocks, and that's how you create this, and I'll use an old word that most people don't use, Rolodex of contacts that will help you, and you'll have a story every single day. And, you know, and I think every news director here talks about story ideas and pitches, story pitches, okay? Everybody's got a story idea, right? But that doesn't mean that you're really prepared for that morning meeting or afternoon meeting, okay? So a story idea is, I want to talk to President Biden about, you know, the $1.7 trillion plan. Well, that's not going to happen, right? That's a story idea. A story pitch is, I talked to, you know, the bus service in Greensboro has had to cut back due to fewer riders, and they're down 20%. I've already contacted the head of transportation department. I also have a woman who has to take the bus to get to work, who now her route has been cut, And that's a story pitch. That's something that you can run with. And I think that comes with having contacts and knowing people and making that contact every single day.
Yeah, that's a great point. Kathy, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Brett has his hand raised, and then Brett, would you then toss it to Max, photojournalist?
Talk to who? I'm sorry.
I said, after you're done, we'll go to Max, our photojournalist here.
Yeah, I'd like to address Hanson's piece and pick up where Kevin just left off. I used to get stories that were, I was sometimes a little bit too ahead, in my opinion, but it's just listening to people's you overhear people's conversations, or you're in a conversation with someone, or you hear somebody having a discussion that gets really intense and you can't help but overhear them. One of the stories I had that helped us, our long form show, beat football one evening, was a simple story about a new accountability plan for the education system. But had I not paid attention and even asked those people in the booth next to me questions about why were they so upset about this, what seemed to be a simple accountability plan to me, that became a show that became actually a two-part show with an audience. And the news department did like 3 or 4 different stories about it. And it just led to a whole lot of other things, but it's just listening to other people and hearing what gets them motivated. It's not just what motivates you, but it's also what motivates them. So listening to your audience and keeping your eyes and ears open, doing your research, and you'll find a lot of really cool stories.
Max, go ahead, and then we'll get to the other hands raised.
All right, so my why has changed for the last maybe 5 years. I've had maybe like 3 different ones. So when I first started, I would say my why was, how do I make my parents proud doing this job and being able to tell really good stories. And then I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, my why changed to how do I become a photojournalist? How do I make sure my video and stories are impactful to the viewer? Well, with attention to detail in my video, and hopefully that it can show and express to the viewer what we're trying to relay to them. And then I think maybe last year, during COVID and stuff, I started realizing that my why now is how do I make sure that everyone's story can be told, from people who might necessarily have a voice in the community. How do I make sure that they can have an opportunity to say something to people who might not necessarily hear from them a lot? So I think that's my why for right now.
And how do you coax that out of them?
I don't know. I think sometimes, just trying to relate. I mean, I'm from Somerville. I lived in Charleston all my life, so I kind of know the area, so I can kind of, just give my perspective I kind of know what they're going through too as well. So that's when I try to just relate to them, and hopefully they can sometimes usually talk, sometimes they don't, but for the most part, I can usually get somebody to speak and then go from there.
And do you find true satisfaction in what you do? A lot of people here are in front of the camera or managers. So I think you have a really different and interesting perspective being behind the camera, yet still in the field.
I guess so. For me, it's once the story is over, I have like a really good satisfaction of I did a really good job on the story. But then I'll have what's next. How do I impact? How do I get better at it? What can I have done differently? What could I have changed? How could I have done the story a little bit better? So when I go back, I watch the stories that I've done and just take any information that I've learned from it and then take it to the next story.
That's great. Bob, I know you've been trying to talk for a while, so I'm going to let you go first. Thank you, Max.
Well, I think there's a couple of points that would be relevant here, and one sort of harkens back to some earlier discussions we were having in this meeting.
And Bob gets to talk, and then all of a sudden he freezes. Poor Bob. let's wait for Bob to get back up. And in the meantime, Alex, you want to talk?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm an EP. Work with Kathy, Max, and Rachel, who you've already heard from. I want to take a moment just to give Rachel and Max a shout out. Rachel called when she was still in college, I think, and wanted to shadow on her own time and did it on the overnights, showing the passion from a student that as a manager you see and you say, wow, I'm impressed. So when you're thinking of, where you want to go and what you want to do, just think about being adjustable and doing whatever it takes to prove yourself. And also Jendaya, senior at Winthrop, as a fellow Winthrop alum, shout out to you. Go Eagles. And I also worked on Winthrop close up, so that's awesome. It was great to hear from you. To answer the question about where to find stories and how to be first, again, yes, it is more important to be right than first. But also a tip is just keep your eyes open. If you're in the car driving down the road and you see something that sparks your interest, I can give you a prime example that a story we're doing right now is about development, and it's a sweep story that Rachel is actually working on that I had pitched. And it was about the clearing of trees, and do developers or counties or cities know exactly how many trees are being torn down? I got the idea just by driving by and seeing these huge swaths of land that had been cleared. And I was wondering, do people actually know how many trees are being torn down and hauled away? And we found out that there's really no tracking for that right now. And so we're going to have an exclusive story about that coming up. But just keep your eyes open, because you never know what you're going to see. And then lastly, my why. When Kathy mentioned what we were going to be talking about, I thought a lot about my why yesterday. It's evolved quite a bit in my 15 years. When I first started, before I even got into college, I went on a visit to the CNN building when I was a kid with my parents, and I saw, all the activity and these journalists in the newsroom going from here to there, and the excitement that came with that. And it was that alone that made me think, oh my gosh, like this is something, look at this life. Like I want to be part of something that exciting. At first I wanted to be a reporter, and I started out doing that, but then I took a job as a producer because I wanted to move up in market size, and I wanted a challenge. And then I realized producing was more for me. And that came with all kinds of new challenges that I had to overcome. And that kind of became my second why, overcoming a challenge that was presented to me. Yes, I want to provide a public service to people, but yes, I'm very competitive as well. So the challenge was I took on this morning show and spent, almost 8 years on a morning show that when it began was not very good at all. And my goal was to turn it around as much as I could to make it competitive with the other stations around me. And, we achieved that. And now my why is, as a manager, I want to be a teacher, really, almost first and foremost. So with producers or reporters, I want to be able to work closely with them to kind of take what they pitch, take their ideas, and kind of add to that and show them on a daily basis ways to take, a package, for example, where you have an intro package tag. There's so many things that you can do as breakouts off of a package. So I work with producers a lot to think about ways to add to a reporter's story, to make the story more interesting for the viewer, and to give them even more information, to know as a producer that you don't just have to rely on the content that comes to you from a reporter. And then with reporters now, we're working so much on being a voice to the voiceless and being advocates. And we've had a lot of great examples of that recently. We have a phone number that we set up for people to contact us. We've gotten hundreds of calls from people about a specific IRS issue. We've been able to work with those people directly, and now they're getting the money that's owed to them. And think about that. Like, those people wouldn't have gotten the money they needed. They wouldn't have been able to go to the grocery store and pay for putting food on the table or paying off debt had we not gotten involved and helped them on a personal level. And how fulfilling is that? You know, it can be something, if you help one person, it will make you feel so successful. And it's not about necessarily how much money you make. It's not about, you know, being on the TV as a celebrity. At least for me, it's about helping people on a really specific level. And that's my why now, but it's changed a lot over the last 15 years.
All right, I think Bob is back in. So the poor man really needs to talk.
Now, I was going to take that as a message. Maybe I shouldn't be talking. I was just going to say, I thought about community when we were talking about this whole conversation, and then also why we're here. You know, what the whole thing is with the FCC and our mission as journalists. But I think any reporter needs to be a member of the community they're reporting on. That's where you pick up contacts. That's where you pick up context. I grew up in Central North Carolina. So when the discussion was going on about firefighters and police, I'm thinking, well, I went to high school with the captain of the police department and things like that. I've got a little more long-term connections with these people. But if you go to church with them, if you live next door to them, if you see them out on jobs, like, you know, see the same cops out on the same crime beat, or, you know, you're at City Hall all the time and talking to councilmen, then you have to approach them as friends and acquaintances, not just as, hey, give me a sound bite. And that's what turns a lot of people off. So I think if you're more friends, a part of the community, you start hearing those stories and you start getting those contexts. And that's what gives us the rich background and context of stories that make people watch and listen. That's it. I'm going to shut up now.
Well, and Forrest, you have your hand raised. Why don't you go ahead?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Forrest Tucker, University of South Carolina, senior, graduate in this May. Kind of weird to say that. Just want to explain the why before we moved on. And it actually really embodied itself in an interview I had on Wednesday. I'm doing a story on how recruiting for college soccer has been changed with the pandemic. And I'm profiling this girl at Hammond School here in Columbia, South Carolina. And I asked her a question. It's a difficult time for her. I said, what would you tell your younger self right now? I didn't expect to get the greatest response ever. But I thought this is probably a worthwhile question to ask. And she said, when I was in middle school, I'd get home from practice really late at night, have to do homework at 9, 10 o'clock. And so she says, I remember crying doing my homework and struggling with that. And so she said, now I feel so proud of myself. And I thought that's what can resonate with anyone if you don't like sports. Everyone's had struggles. And I shout out to Dr. Laura Smith, who's in this meeting. I told her about that yesterday. So obviously she's listening, thinking, oh gosh, he's really excited about this soundbite. So that's really nice for me to have that moment in the past week and then actually kind of put some thought into it this morning.
That's great. Yeah. And so, you're kind of talking about how it stoked your passion, this great soundbite, right? That's really important in this business. If you don't love this business, you're going to want to think about doing something else, because we work holidays, weekends, mornings, overnights, evenings, everything. If there's a big story, you could put in 80 hours a week, and you have to be dedicated to this business or it really truly will eat you up. And I hope you guys take this to heart, because it truly is not about being on camera. It is about delivering information to our community. And so if that is something that you are on the fence about, I would suggest you have a conversation with your with one of your professors or a guidance counselor, or somebody who's in the business, because there are quite a few people who get in it and really struggle because they don't want to work after 5 o'clock, or they don't want to work mornings, or they don't want to work weekends, or, they don't want to work night side. And there is value in every single one of those positions. When you work night side, you're thrown a lot. You learn time management. You learn how to operate quickly. You learn to be adaptable and flexible. When you work mornings, you really have to have a rigid schedule for yourself and go to bed early and make sure that, you are following that every day. So you have to find the positive in every single situation and every single schedule, but you really do have to ask yourself if you want to do this and do this long term, because it is hard. And I'm not saying that to scare you. I just really want you to understand that this business is hard. There are a lot of rewards. There's a lot of great things about it, but it's really hard. And I see that Brad Hyatt has his hand raised. So I'm going to let him wrap it up. We've got about 4 minutes, and then we're going to move on to the next session.
Hey, everybody. I'm Brad Hyatt. I'm the news director at WIS-TV in Columbia, South Carolina. But I just wanted to real quick, because I was going to say that earlier, Kathy. I think that's very important. One of your whys needs to be, I love it. It needs to be that, because you're going to need that as a driving force in this career, or quite frankly, any career, but specifically this one, because what Kathy said is true. There are going to be some times where it is going to be tough. And there are going to be some times where you will be running on fumes a little bit, especially if you have one of those big stories that do happen. And this year, they seem to be happening at an accelerated rate. So have that love of it. That's important. And when you're looking for value in this career, and there's a lot of whys for me personally, I won't go into all of those, but one thing that it continues to drive me and fascinate me is learning how other people see things. I can only see things through my lens. All right. It's limited. It's what I have learned, seen in my life and experienced. Journalism is power because it gives voice to other perspectives that you don't know. So it's a learning experience for all of us to see things from a different viewpoint. And there's not just two viewpoints. That's the problem that we have run into in journalism and still are struggling with, quite frankly. So it is a journey that you can jump on, and it's a journey of learning. And that's a core value. And you can take that learning and helping other people see things from a different perspective, because they don't. And as we know, that is the power of journalism and why it's so important. So have that love, because it really matters.
Not to mention the fact that it is super cool to have a job that is constitutionally guaranteed. Like, that's just awesome. Victoria, did you want to sum up anything before I move us on to our next?
Yeah, I first of all, thank you to all the students for being so gutsy and sharing your why and your stories. We really appreciate your input. Thank you to everybody who participated in sharing your why. As you can see, people's whys are varied. They change. As Brad mentioned, he has a couple of them. I do too. One as a journalist, one as a manager. It's an evolving thing, but the reason that we have this as a session and the reason that it's so important is kind of where we got to at the end. It is a hard job. It is an important job. It is critical to our society. And if you are not 100% committed and love it, then you're not going to be successful in it, and you're going to burn out very quickly. So you really have to find that this lights you up inside. And maybe that's like Max, and what lights him up is being behind the camera and visually sharing that story, or like Alex, who is behind the scenes and now managing, but was producing. And it may take you a little bit of time to find that, but you have to search for that, and you have to be willing to say to yourself, does this light me up? If it doesn't, like Kathy said, it's not worth it for yourself or for your station that you'll be joining. But when it does light you up, it is the best job in the world. And that's why all of our RTDNAC board members are here with you on a Saturday morning, because we love what we do. It lights us up inside, and we want you guys to get that too. So thank you so much for sharing all of your stories with us.